Had you told me 6 months ago I'd be up here, I would have had you committed. I'm up here because Claudia has had a sermon series of acting out, and we've also had the stand-up of the Vitality team. So Claudia thought that I should stand up here and share my story of coming here, because it's rather unique, so she thought. My story starts a lot of years ago. I went to the Church of the Nazarene growing up. It was a small chapel, very much like this. We had the King James Version Bible. That's what we knew. The service could get lively at times. Hollis, my wife, she came from a Navy family. Her background was Episcopal Church. She went to a Catholic school, and her family had a solid faith background. Mine didn't have that solid faith background. My parents didn't go to church. Now, this doesn't mean that I didn't spend a lot of hours in a church. I went to Sunday school, Sunday service, vacation Bible school. I went to teen night, summer church retreats. So I spent a lot of hours there. The reason I did is it was convenient for my parents. See, they used church as a babysitter. The church bus would come right to our door, pick us up, take us to church, bring us right back to the door. So it was very convenient. My aunts and uncles, cousins, very involved in the church that I went to. And I saw them at church. I saw them at home. And I found, to me, they weren't the same person in both those places. So they weren't acting out their faith in their lives. And to me, at 16, that was very hypocritical. I felt that then. So at 16, I left the church because there was no message at that church for me. Hadn't been. So for the next 42 years, I only went to church for weddings and funerals. Sorry. And so about 32 years later, I went back to that little church for my cousin's funeral. They weren't happy to see me there. I spoke to one of the women there. She'd been a leader in the church for over 40 years. The only thing she wanted to talk about, she wanted to tell my wife how terrible a person I was way back then. Well, that confirmed I'd made the right choice. I'd left. So, go forward a little there. In 1980, the agency I worked for was consolidated, and that unit was moving to Texas. And I was fortunate, I was lucky to be in a position to see that that was coming. So I had applied for jobs in 3 other places. Hollis had just graduated from getting her master's degree, and she was looking for a job. Come to find out, she had interviewed, applied for those same 3 places. Not only the same places, the same supervisors. We would have sat within a couple of desks of each other at any one of those 3 jobs. So that was fate. We were going to meet. That's the way it was. So we worked together for over 30 years, very closely, sometimes in the same office, most of the time in the same office. I was 56 years old and I was eligible to retire. I was waiting for her to retire. She had 3 years left. She gets an offer to retire early. The problem is she had 18 days to make that decision from the time they offered it to the time she had to be out the door. So again, I was very fortunate to be in a position that I could see this coming because I handled manpower and budget. So we saw it coming. We were prepared. We retired that May. We moved to our lake house. At the lake house in retirement, we were looking for opportunities to help the community. Hollis was looking for a church. She wanted to get back to that. So in and out of my life, I've been very fortunate to have people come in at the right time, whether it be for me, for them, or for both of us. Well, 2 of those people were Rick and Linda. They were our neighbors at the lake house, and we didn't know them very well. We saw them every few weekends when we showed up. but we got to know them pretty well once we moved there. So we moved there in May. Rick had liver cancer years before, and it had returned. He had a liver transplant. It returned in his new liver. So he had to go for treatments. His brother, Jerry, who was taking him to all these doctor appointments, had just had a heart attack and wasn't able to take him. Hey, I'm retired. I got plenty of time. It's one gift I have, is time. So I volunteered. We're going to go to Georgetown from the lake. We're going to drive to Georgetown every day, back and forth every day for radiation treatments. Well, needless to say, we spent a lot of time in that car together. We spent a lot of time fishing together. We got to know him and his family very well. Well, we also, his son, Stephen, was one we got to know very well. And we were invited to their wedding. Now remember, I only go to church for weddings and funerals. That's it. So we were invited. They were having their wedding at Beaver Dam United Methodist Church. And the reason was because their plans had fallen through, and they found the depot, and they were going to have their reception there. And somebody suggested, well, there's Beaver Dam Methodist. Maybe you should go talk to Claudia. So they went and talked to Claudia. Claudia went to the trustees of Beaver Dam and said, is it okay? I mean, they don't go to our church. We don't know them. Is it okay? Well, the trustees, in their generosity, said, yes, we want our church open to everybody. So please, come. So they had their wedding there. And that's where we saw Claudia for the first time. Very unique ceremony. Very real person. So we went to the wedding. Our lives went on for months. A few months later, I get an email in my email address for Hollis from one of the ladies groups around here about Meals on Wheels volunteers. Well, once again, fate brought it right to me. Well, I was in the right place at the right time. My dad, before he passed away, had Meals on Wheels brought to him. Somebody did that for him. So we were going to do it for somebody else. Pay that back. So a few months in, we show up for Meals on Wheels, and there's Claudia. We see her again. And we meet the women of Rouse's. Well, we told Claudia how much we enjoyed her wedding ceremony. And over the next few months, we kept seeing these women and Claudia, and told Claudia we were thinking about coming to one of her services. All she said was, love to have you. No pressure. It was a casual invite, but we kept thinking about that invitation. Love to have you. So, of course, me being the logical one, I wanted to do some research on the United Methodist Church. So I went to umc.org, researched it, read the foundational documents, and it worked for both of us. It was a little less formal for her, and a little less, can I get a witness for me? So it worked out. Now, over a year after that wedding, and months after the initial invitation, we decided to go to a service. And we decided on Rouse's because it was 9:45. I get up early. She doesn't. So this was a good compromise. So the day we come into church, we pull in off the street, and it looks like that little church I grew up with. I started couldn't breathe, palms got sweaty. It was tough. I wanted to run. And based on my experience, as soon as I walked through that door, somebody was going to point at me and yell, stranger danger. So as soon as I came through the door, there were the familiar faces of the Meals on Wheels women. So that helped. My plan was I was going to sit in the back, where we do now. I was going to slip in, slip out. Well, my wife is a pretty smart woman. She knows me. She sat on the aisle seat. She wasn't going to let me slip out before it was over. So after that, we had after that, probably half of this congregation came up and introduced themselves and said, almost verbatim, love to have you. So I felt comfortable with that. And of course, about the second weekend, one of those people was Paul Flynn. He comes up, he goes, hey, nice to meet you. Hey, you want to go to Wood Ministry? I'm like, okay. Well, here we are with fate again. Because growing up, I knew what it was like not to have heat in a house during the winter. So I knew I had to do this. So we get to Wood Ministry. For the first time, I'm there. And one of the guys there has to leave. Had bad news, had to leave. So what happens is all these macho men with doing all their tough stuff stop the machinery and get in a prayer circle and hold hands. So now I'm holding hands with Paul. And I'm thinking, what have I got myself into? Well, what they did, they prayed, and then they went back to work. That was it. We started the machinery up and we went back to work. They acted out their faith in everyday life. That wasn't the people I grew up with. So, over the next few weeks, I sat back in that pew and I listened to Claudia's sermons. And I promise you, I wasn't looking for a message. I'd heard all that before, and I could ignore every one of them. It wasn't a problem. So, with those sermons, I felt every week that she was looking at me and directing some of that sermon to me. And Hollis and I would talk about it on the way home from church. And every time, Hollis said, yes, I got the message. But it was a different message than what I got. So that was rather odd. So, Martha Flint, about 2 weeks in, she reads from the New Living Translation Bible. Now, again, this isn't the Bible that I grew up with. So afterwards, I asked Martha about it. That was it. The next week I show up, and Martha gives me a New Living Translation Pew Bible. Now, one of my bucket list items is that I wanted to read the Bible cover to cover. For me to do that with the King James Version, I couldn't do it. But with this one, I understood it. It made sense to me. So, I have been reading it cover to cover. I'm pretty close to the New Testament now. So a few weeks later, Claudia calls and wants to meet with us. And I'm thinking, okay, here comes the hard sell. Okay, so we meet with her. She just wanted to get to know us. She'd seen us here for a few weeks, had talked to us, and wanted to get to know us. I found out she was a real person. She just happened to be a pastor. That was a great thing to me. At one of those meetings, Claudia obviously had talked to Martha, and Claudia gave me my own New Living Translation Bible for new, with larger print. Obviously, I need that, as you can see. So while reading the Old Testament, which is daunting, I had questions, and they were tough questions. And I actually found myself asking her if we could meet, which was a big step. Now, she gave me honest answers, and they were from her point of view, and she made that known. This is my point of view. There may be others. That was great. She had no agenda, no hard sell, and she was very much like Philip on the road to Gaza. She was explaining the scriptures to me. Now, Romans 12:2, let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn God's will for you. Well, I started to change the way I was thinking. I started to realize it wasn't fate in all this thing in my life. It was God's will. I wasn't, I wasn't fortunate or lucky to be in a position to make those choices. I was blessed. Those people would come in and out of my life weren't a coincidence, but part of God's plan for both of us. Now, because of my unique perspective, I was asked to join the Vitality team. And that's all about bringing people to God, the big C. Okay? If that casual invitation from Claudia and the Meals on Wheels women had been any stronger, I would have run away. That was my viewpoint at the time. And in Romans 12:6, in His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things. Well, the Vitality team's asking you to use your gifts to make those casual invitations outside of church. Plant the seed and be patient. It took me a long time to accept that invitation. So Romans 12:8, if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. And you should do it as an individual or as a group. Kindness is it as individuals would be those smiling, familiar faces that were here when we showed up. The congregation introducing themselves, offering a Bible, and acting out your faith outside of church. The kindness as a group. The decision of Beaver Dam trustees to open their church to that wedding. You'll never know how something like that will make a difference in somebody's life. It did mine, because that was the only way I was going to get to church. Romans 12:8. So if God's given you the ability to prophecy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. Well, God has given me enough faith over the last 6 months that I can stand here and tell you that I know I'm a very blessed man and that God has a plan for me. I've just begun my journey of faith, praying, and offering my gifts. I've come farther in 6 months than the previous 58 years. You may not realize it, but you're part of that. Now, Claudia's recent sermon, she said if you pray for patience, God will put you in situations where you need to practice it. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you pray for faith and guidance, you may find yourself in front of a group of people you avoided for decades, talking to them like they were family. Thank you.